This dataset hmohiv.dat is taken from the book Applied Survival Analysis by Hosmer and Lemeshow. And what we're going to do in this video is just look at the dataset and prepare it for analysis. Okay, background. HMO. It's a health maintenance organization, and what they're doing is they're trying to evaluate the survival time of the HIV positive members using a follow-up study. And these are the variables: ID, just numbers, 100 participants coded from 1 to 100. The entry date, that's the date that they enter the follow-up study. And then the end date, so that's the date at which we last see them alive or that they die from HIV. And then time, that's the survival time, so it's the difference between the end date and the entry date, and it's measured in months. So it's months between the entry date and the end date. This is the first edition. This text file is from the first edition, and there's error there. It's months, not days. Age is age of the individual at the start of the follow-up period, so that's when they entered the follow-up. And then we have two variables, which are categorical drug for history of IV drug use, which is coded 1 if yes and 0 if no. Status, that's to do with the censoring variable. That's coded 1 if the death was due to AIDS or AIDS-related factors, and 0 otherwise. So let's have a look. What we notice is that the time here, the key variables pick the time, age, drug, status. Time, that is the survival time, and that is continuous. It's measured in months, so we'll treat that as continuous. Age we'll treat as continuous. Drug is categorical, otherwise known as a factor. It's either going to be yes or no. So it's a binary or dichotomous variable. Similarly with status. Okay. Another name for dichotomous variable is dummy or indicator variables. Right. So these are qualitative factors. So loads of words to mean the same thing. Okay. So before we load it into R, we have to first see what it looks like, and this is what it looks like. That's a case number, entry date, end date, blah. What we notice there is no header. Look up there, there is no header. So when we go to R now, which I'm flipping over to R, it's a dat file, so I use read.table. I prefer the file.choose command, so that allows me just to click through the folders to reach my file rather than type in the path to the data file. Header is false because there is no header. There's no name saying what each column is. So press enter, and then a window pops up, and I've set by default to a folder called R stuff. I showed you how to do it in a previous video. That's kind of neat if you've got all your data in a subfolder. So this one's called HM. There it is, hmohiv. To see that we've loaded it properly, let's just look at a few observations. You don't typically want to list them all because you could have thousands and thousands of observations, in which case your screen would be absolutely too much. So what I've done is I'm listing the first 3 observations across all columns, so first 3 rows of stuff in this data file, just to see that it's been loaded properly. Here you go. Notice that because there is no header, R just calls it just V1 all the way up to V7, but we know what they are. Specifically, it's in the order, not that order, it's in this order. So ID, entry date, end date, blah blah blah. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay. To label our variables over columns, we use the names command. Names, and then in the bracket the name of our data file, which I've called dat. You can call it something which is more meaningful. And then equals, and then the C for the concatenate, which stands for concatenate, and then open bracket, and now in these speech or quotation marks we put in the name of the variables. So the first one is ID, By the way, you can kind of choose exactly what you want. You don't have to do what I've done. V2 we know is the entry date, so I've just put entry. The V3 as it stands, that is the end date, so that's the date at which the individual either died of AIDS or was the last time recorded alive in the study. Time, that's column 4, that is, well, that's just natural just to call it time. Age at the start of the follow-up, measured in months, that's natural to call it age as well. And then V6 and V7, drug and status respectively. V7 in the, here they've called it, oh, I've changed it, that was called censored, right? If you look in the second edition, it might be called censored, or in the book it's called censored. I've done status, it seems to be more natural to me. Status being 1 if the person did die of AIDS and 0 if they didn't. So some books like to use the word status as opposed to censor, because with censor you might just misunderstand and get those codes the wrong way around in your head. Okay, so I've done that. I press enter, and now what? Oh, now I can look at it again, obviously. So let's do, I can type that whole thing in, or what you're seeing here, I'm just using up arrow on my keyboard to trace back through the history of commands, which saves lazy old me having to type everything out. There. So what we can see now with the start and the revised data frame is that now we have more kind of meaningful labels for our columns, variables. Good. Just notice that at this point we can just check to see that R is identifying the nature of our variables correctly. So if I do, if I want to check that the entry is, you can see it's obviously it's not numeric, it is data types are either numeric or categorical factor. So here these are obviously not numeric, those numbers don't make numerical sense, so we can check to see if R is seeing it as a numeric by doing is it numeric, so is dot numeric, and then I'm saying from the data file dat the variable entry, and then it will return true or false. False, it is not numeric. Well, that's as we expect. We can say is, well, we know drug and status, they're kind of categorical, they can be factors, although they're already coded into dummies. If we go drug here, it's false, so it's treating it as numeric. That's because we've coded 0 and 1, which we can put into our model, and it will be fine. If I didn't have 0 and 1, if I have, well, drug 0 stood for, let's just recap, drug 0 stood for no and yes, so instead of having 0 I could have had just no's in place of zeros and yes in place of ones, and then R would have recognized, because it's numbers, not, I mean it would have been words not numbers, would recognize that it's factors and would have still dealt with it. Okay, so our data now is all ready for analysis, and the thing I'm going to do with this data set, as the book shows, is how to model it using various models like the Cox proportional hazards model. Okay, so maybe I'll see you in another video on this.